Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. Today I've got a quick video on understanding the difference between the definition of done and acceptance criteria. This is one I find that students in my classes, but also people that I work with sometimes, they struggle with understanding the difference between these two elements of Scrum. Very important to understand the difference. Now sometimes misconceptions that I've seen can include, assuming that a definition of done, there's one for every product backlog item. Sometimes people think that they've got to create a new definition of done every sprint. So there's quite a long list of misconceptions or misunderstandings sometimes about the definition of done. And that's what this video hopefully will illustrate or help you with. That's my hope. So let's continue on.
Okay, so let's start first with our product backlog. And this visual here is just meant to represent just a simple product backlog, top to bottom, ordered. As I'm sure you're already aware, product backlog is made up of PBIs or product backlog items. These could be user stories, features, whatever it is you're using, but PBIs is the language I'll use here for this video. Now, each PBI is going to have its own acceptance criteria, and that acceptance criteria is unique to that PBI. Now, I don't want to get you to get wrapped around the axle on this being unique for that PBI. I mean, you may use the same words somewhere else for some other PBI. The point of this, my statement is that when you write acceptance criteria, you're writing it for that PBI. You're not creating it for some other PBI. You're doing it just for this one. And this PBI plus the acceptance criteria is what makes each item its own special snowflake or makes it unique. And fundamentally, this is defining what we're building, right? So the product backlog plus the acceptance criteria describes the uniqueness of that feature that it is we're building. Now, let's continue on. So our definition of done applies to everything in our product backlog. So every product backlog item is the definition of done. The work inside of it is applied to all of any product backlog item. And your definition of done will typically include things like testing, documentation, deployment, things that are not specific to a particular feature. It's the work that has to be done for how the work needs to happen, right, for building your product. So definition of done applying to all product backlog items, each product backlog item having its own acceptance criteria. Now, let's continue. Let's talk a little bit. I want to clarify another challenge that I see some teams or some people having, which is understanding what the DoD applies to with respect to the increment and product backlog items. So, simple context here. Suppose we have a product backlog again, and that product backlog, let's say we're in sprint planning, and a forecast is created. So forecast of, let's say, 3 items. So here we are looking at the items in the forecast. So we have here each PBI, 3 PBIs, and each PBI has its own acceptance criteria, and also the DoD. Now the DoD was not just created for this sprint. There is one DoD. It evolves, so you may be added to throughout the life of the life of a product. Teams can be adding new practices, new things that they want that will improve quality or reliability of the product, or it could be more documentation. Whatever it is, the DoD can evolve over time, but you're not creating a new DoD every sprint. So, and we have a forecast with PBIs and a DoD. Now, let's say for the first PBI, so the first PBI with its acceptance criteria, which clarify what the team is going to build, plus the DoD that describes the work, tested, documented, deployed, is then integrated or added into the increment, which is what this box is meant to represent here. It's my first PBI. Now let's do the next one. So we add another PBI plus the DoD, and again, into that increment. And you notice the box gets a little bigger, and that's what this box is meant to represent, is the increment, but we're adding to that increment. Do another one. So here we are, it's the third one, and again, DoD, the PBI acceptance criteria, again, part of the increment. So the increment here has grown larger, and that's because, we've added more PBIs. So So here's where sometimes people get a little bit confused, because when we talk about the DoD providing transparency to the increment, it's absolutely true, because any PBI that we've built must have conformed to the definition of done, if we've called it done. So the so the increment is made transparent in terms of it being done by that definition of done. Now, this doesn't mean, though, that the DoD only applies to increment. It actually applies to each PBI. And it's because your increment is added to with each PBI as it's being built. It by default means that it also conforms to the definition of done. So this is important, right? So your DoD applies to each PBI, but at the end of the sprint, as you're looking at the increment, again, the DoD does actually kind of apply to it, right? It does, because you've added PBIs that have conformed to the DoD to it all along.
So thank you. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, that's great. If you've got your own experience with definition of done, or challenges you've had either creating it or putting it in place, or having your teams or the rest of your team understand the difference, please add a comment below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts or your experiences with doing this and working with Scrum. So thank you very much.